Dedicated viewers of my channel will have gotten used to a new video arriving every Tuesday. And although I honor that commitment here, I have to admit that I may have gotten a bit ahead of myself when it comes to what I thought I was capable of producing. I've been a little busy. I recently took a trip to Ljubljana and prioritized visiting the city and friends. I've also been playing mad amounts of Civ VII. I will have plenty to say about the new game, but I'm working on understanding it all and thinking of ways to say what I want to say. There will be a lot more to come, but it's going to take a little time. So please be patient. For this week, I have decided to share a Civilization VI story that has been sitting on the shelf for almost half a year. This was actually the first Civilization story that I made. As you will see, it didn't go as expected, and after making it, I decided that it could not be the first story that I released to the public. When I recorded this video, I still did not actually have a channel. I can assure you that I did eventually win as Harald Varangian, but unlike with John Curtin and Lincoln, there is no redemption story for this leader because I did not record my eventual victory. All the same, this game was a fun alternative to history. Every alternative to history is fun. That is, after all, why we play. So sit back and enjoy what was at one time supposed to be the first ever Civilization story. Welcome to Civ VI Stories, where we explore alternatives to history through the lens of the world's most addictive video game. Games are played on Deity, no challenges. Generally, I don't use mods or game modes except for Sukotak's Oceans. A great game is epic and tells a story. It has a history, all condensed down into 15 minutes. Along the way, you can learn tips and tricks on how to be a better Civ player, as well as strategies on how to play specific civilizations. Today, we are looking at the game I played as Harald Hadrada, Varangian. Civilization began for Norway, as it always does, by the sea. We're fancy, and we like lobster. I hate losing a turn, so Nidaros was founded right where Odin put us. Barbarian clans mode was enabled, and for over 700 years we battled barbarians to our north. 1,000 years passed until we realized we weren't alone in the world. We met Robert the Bruce of Scotland.
Damn Scots! They ruined Scotland!
A couple of centuries later, we met Sweden.
Big summer blowout?
With so many sea resources at our disposal, after 1,600 years of civilized society, we decided that we would worship the god of the sea, so we could be just that little bit more productive while working water tiles. It was with tremendous sadness that we Norwegians lamented being an ironless society. Our intrepid boatmen navigated a path through the seas to the west, traveling far beyond our borders, and met a strange society of bare-chested, armorless warriors that called themselves India. They were strange and far away. I did not know what to think. Despite how we felt about ourselves, the legacy media was unhappy with our ancient era progress, and we entered a classical era dark age. We decided that Eurekas were our pathway to a better future. Canada announced itself to us in 1800 BC.
I moved here from Canada, and they think I'm slow, eh?
A couple of hundred years later, believing warfare an inevitable consequence to human existence, we decided that an oligarchical system of government was the preferred way to organize society. The key strength of Norway, when playing Harald Varangian, is his ability to levy city-states and generate science, culture, and faith from levied unit kills. We became suzerain of Granada. They possessed the iron and the swordsmen that we did not have. For a fraction of the usual levying cost, we seized control of their military. After 2,000 years of relative peaceful coexistence, the Bruce, who is no fool, saw what was happening and wanted clarity. We offered clarity in the form of war. The gods punished us for our insolence by burning forests around our cities. But we pushed forward and laid siege to Dumbarton, which we seized a few decades later. We were unable to swing our dark age into something truly heroic, but we were confident that we had grown into the dominant power on the continent. In 550 BC, our warriors had successfully hunted down a band of defenseless Scottish settlers and quickly showed them how a Norwegian life was superior. We kept our troops at Scotland's border. They were technologically superior, but we had strength in numbers and the ingenuity of a more capable military strategy in spite of our dearth of resources. We expanded our settlements to the remote island continents to the west, and in our eastern exploration in 325 BC, we met the Japanese, who seemed even stranger and more distant than India. On the verge of stealing back Dumbarton with their navy, I decided to make peace with Scotland, for now. And I made sure that my soldiers were paid for the gains they had taken. But the war did not really end. A highly advanced barbarian race began to make trouble on the eastern side of my empire. My civilization's lack of iron was causing a major problem. I hired one of their men-at-arms as a mercenary to fight against their own men and defend my empire. Just before the birth of Christ and long before Magellan ever appeared on the scene, my sailors, capable of navigating ocean tiles with simple shipbuilding, circumnavigated the globe and were the first to do so. I found life without iron trying, and pesky bands of barbarians on my eastern border made life difficult for me. I levied Granada's troops for a second time to help me be rid of them. I became suzerain of Mohenjo-Daro, which brought the promise of a golden age. India, whose lands were distant, proved that they could make trustworthy allies, so I brokered a deal to share military information, which would help us both during the conquest of our enemies. With the dawn of the Renaissance, we entered into a golden age. Scotland did not navigate the medieval era with similar ambition and fell into a dark age, which meant that they would be ripe for invasion. We negotiated a deal to share research secrets with Sweden, an alliance. For now. An intrepid band of settlers founded the outpost of Alisund on a peninsula at the edge of the Scottish territory, all for the sake of mining iron into our empire, which would allow our injured melee units to refit their armor and keep up their assault when the war began. In 425 AD, we built a stave church just to show off who we were. We'd get a little extra production out of our sea resources too, which was always nice. Our pantheon gives a boost already, so building stave churches helps us double down on that. More importantly is, that same year, we were able to start mining precious iron. I was able to become suzerain of Preslav. This would help Norway accumulate more diplomatic favor that I could trade to other nations like Canada for gold. The gold I could then use to upgrade and modernize my army. With our research of mercenaries complete, it was time to plug in the professional army card and start making our units a little stronger. This was especially important for our navy, whose galleys were outclassed by the Scottish caravels. In 520 AD, I started my conquest of Scotland by declaring war on the city-state of Taruga. Their land would be the door that would open the rest of Scotland. In 660 AD, after researching exploration, we grabbed a Tier 2 government and became a merchant republic. Taruga's walls were no match for siegecraft and quickly fell thanks to our battering ram. In 720, the city fell and became part of Norway. The storm had been brewing. Taruga was the first domino to fall. With Taruga's border secure, Norway decided that it needed more space for Norwegians to live, and that space was currently occupied by Scots. In 780 AD, we declared war. We took the enemy by surprise and crippled their navy and began our siege of Roxburgh. In 840 AD, the mausoleum of Halicarnassus was built in Nidaros. We already had significant boosts to our sea resources and tiles, and this wonder, one of the easiest to build in the game, would be an even greater help. In 860, the great naval commander Himerios joined our great empire. At that same time, we were forced to re-enlist Granada's troops for a small fee. Mohenjo-Daro, still aligned to us, kept Scottish forces at bay on their western border. We took Roxburgh and became suzerain of Kabul. That same year, we upgraded our swordsmen and unleashed the berserker upon the world. Using nothing but sea power, we took air. We sieged their capital and destroyed their trade routes. With Scottish knights, Stirling put up a formidable resistance, so I enlisted the help of Mohenjo-Daro in the hopes of overwhelming them with sheer numbers. In 1050, Stirling fell and the Scottish were routed. They were no longer a threat to us, but they did develop the pike and shot. It felt ahead of schedule and meant that our invasion would slow down. By becoming suzerain of Jerusalem, I ensured that Norway would experience back-to-back golden ages. We began our industrial era with a golden age and decided to pull all our concentration into our war effort. With several days between sessions, as we entered this new era, I was a bit lost as to what my previous goals had been. With the Scots sufficiently subdued, our relations remained hostile, but decided to concentrate on consolidating our new lands and preparing invasions of free cities and city-states on our borders, thereby scrambling our troops away from the Scottish border. Although we had been friendly with India for over 1,000 years, they appeared to now be occupying lands that we felt ought to be occupied by Norwegians. Meanwhile, I continued to earn suzerainty over the city-states, including Wolin. With Wolin allied with us, every kill becomes more meaningful as we earn great general points. This also made maintaining the war with Scotland more profitable. Rapa Nui, who had been friendly to us, was the first city-state I decided to turn my back on. After a few shots from my bombards and my caravels from the sea, our musketmen entered the city as conquering heroes. The former Scottish outpost of Aberdeen, now controlled by free cities, put up a more formidable resistance, but I was, after all, besieging them with reserve troops. Despite their aid in the war against Scotland, my greedy eyes turned toward Mohenjo-Daro. I'd been using Mohenjo-Daro's levied units to take Aberdeen. Now that we were at war, Aberdeen would be even more difficult to take. In an attempt to secure the Eureka for enlightenment, I used my faith and recruited the services of Francis Drake, but it failed to have the effect I desired. Still, I was able to retire him into a privateer that I could use to pillage the coastlines of my enemies. It took longer than should have been necessary, but we added Aberdeen to the empire. Taking Mohenjo-Daro also took longer than necessary, but we made sure that it was our knight who took the city, and it secured for us the Eureka for military science. Our troops on the Western Front barely took a moment to rest before they took to the sea in preparation for the inevitable invasion of India. But we had been friends for so long that I was prevented from denouncing Chandragupta. My troops were thirsty for battle, but who to fight? I decided to declare war on the city-state of Hunza. My friendship with Chandragupta did finally end, and we denounced him immediately. It had been far too peaceful. We couldn't have that. Immediately after denouncing him, we used our Golden Age dedication and declared war, simultaneously boosting our sense of national pride. First step was to siege Trivandrum and secure a beachhead. Hunza fell the same year. Sweden, who had long been friendly with us, learned what we were really about, and that is conquest. We made our first inroads into India by swiftly taking Trivandrum and then turning my attention to laying siege to Calcutta. A barbarian clan on my eastern border became the independent city-state of Zanzibar. I became their suzerain and hired their troops, hoping to capture the settler they had stolen during the centuries of barbarism, but it was not to be. I could use those troops, however, to expand my influence eastward by conquering Bologna. Although I was able to capture Calcutta, with loyalty pressure an issue, if I were to get bogged down into a protracted war, I would have trouble keeping the city and trouble conquering India. Patna, well fortified and surrounded by favorable defensive terrain, would be a critical target. Canada had battleships in their navy. That would slow our momentum westward. The city walls of Patna were formidable, and Canada's battleships began to beat down my forces. Be careful when purchasing units because they spawn in your encampment district, which, if it's a conquered city, you played no part in placing. I failed to hold Calcutta, and Bologna's ramparts were tearing my mercenaries to shreds. It was time to fall back. Chandragupta offered peace and some gold. It was time to regroup, but Canada's navy was still a force to be reckoned with. I managed to avoid a modern era dark age. India slipped into a dark age, meaning their lands would be ripe for the conquering. First task on the docket was to use steam power technology, upgrade my caravels to ironclads in order to counter Canada's battleships. In 1500 AD, for the sole purpose of pillaging resources for culture and science, I declared war on Japan. When I revealed coal, it became apparent that the city-state of Venice, who I was already at war with, would become a priority target. My ironclads could now dominate the sea and would push back the Canadian fleet. I captured Calcutta again, but despite India's dark age, it would prove difficult to hold. My hired forces in the east suffered heavy losses. Canada's open borders agreement with India helped them to defend Indian lands and put my defense of Calcutta in peril. I poached a Canadian settler. Starved of resources all game, I would use them to procure both oil and coal. All of my warmongering, without my even realizing, put me at war with Sweden, who made landfall with cavalry near my ancient cities. Realizing that 80% of the world was at war with me, I figured, why not make it 100%, and I declared war, once again, on India. The classical era was in the past, but in 1590 AD, Norwegians built the House of Artemis. Norwegians also became the first to introduce artillery to warfare. It took centuries, but we eventually captured Venice. My artillery took up a good position to pummel Bangalore. Controlling the strait between the Bangalore Peninsula and mainland India would be critical in my effort to surround them. We took Bangalore, but the question remained, could we hold it? Matthew Perry, after retiring from Friends, joined Norway as a great admiral. My artillery took up another good position to fire upon Ranchi, an island town that stood in the way of a clear southern sea passage around India. The Scots, who had been irrelevant for a millennia, continued to try to expand, but they were a backward people who left their cities and their settlers defenseless, and Norway swiftly integrated their attempts of expansion into their empire. Tupac Amaru joined us. He would lead our land units into battle. Ranchi had no business being a city, so we razed it to the ground. After centuries of a World's Fair, it was decided that Norway had the most creative people and the best inventors, with Sweden finishing in second place, Japan and Canada tying for third, and India and Scotland taking home participation trophies. More great people, it also seemed, were keen to join us. After keeping the pesky Scots at bay on our southern border, we decided to reassert our dominance over them and began to siege their northern cities in preparation for a full invasion. It was time to erase them from history, but, with minimal effort and few troops. The World Congress of 1655 proved a turning point in the game. We took our vote to reduce military production requirements as a sign that our bid to take over the world was on track. We dismissed Canada's diplomatic victory points as irrelevant. Their dominion would soon be under our sway. As troops arrived to India's north, Norwegian artillery began to fire upon Chennai. But we were forced to pull back our small invasion force when India's cavalry armies began to fight back. But we did finally take Hyderabad. Despite their dark age, Indian cities were remarkably loyal. We kept taking Bangalore, but her people kept up their resistance. It meant leaving a garrison in place, troops who would have been better served invading mainland India. The introduction of our tank army would turn the tide of the war against the Scots and hasten their demise. In short order, they rolled over Dumfries. After centuries of war, Canada offered a peace deal. This would help my troops concentrate on battling Indian forces without being impeded by Canada. We entered the atomic era with another golden age. India, again, were in the midst of a consecutive dark age. Surely they would succumb to our military pressures. We opted to pursue a military strategy and took our military production bonus. Somehow, on a map with so much naval opportunity, by 1705, no one had built the Great Lighthouse. It's a wonder that I so rarely build, but we Norwegians finally got around to it. In 1710, we earned our Tier 3 government and adopted communism. We focused our policies on building up our navy and controlling loyalty in cities we would inevitably conquer. Conquest of the Scots, though slow, was fruitful in ways beyond taking cities, as my levy troops earned culture and science with every kill. Our suzerainty of Woldian also helped us to earn Great General and Great Admiral points with every kill as well. Our war in the east against Sweden and Japan was slow and cautious and launched from the sea. The siege of Jabalpur was similarly cautious. A lone artillery with a long range hurling fire over the walls once every decade. The advance of their AT crew prompted a retreat. Military operations seemed to be advancing too slowly, so we leveraged our faith into artillery units who would barrage cities and forcing them to surrender most readily to our side. Norwegian forces in the east began to concentrate their invasion of the eastern powers at the port city of Karlstad. As had become an all too common problem, in order to keep our armies in the field, our insufficient resources caught up with us. We were out of oil. In 1765, we resigned the Scots to a footnote in history. Robert the Bruce was a worthy adversary, but he would play no more part in this story. Having seized Haddington, our troops from the Norwegian mainland were free to explore opportunities for conquest overseas. Now we possessed the Forbidden Palace and used our extra policy slot to attract great engineers to our cause. In 1770, our navy on the Eastern Front took control of Karlstad. They then turned their attention to the port city of Lund. Needing to concentrate on holding the cities of Hyderabad and Bangalore, years passed before we were able to continue our siege of Madurai, and in the intervening years, they had rebuilt their city walls. Troops in the north of India transferred their barrage from Jabalpur over to Chennai in a siege effort that was proving far more successful. In desperate need of oil, we slotted in the resource management policy card to avoid waste and make better use of our oil derricks. In 1790, we upset India by building the Taj Mahal in Norway. Suck on that, India. The eastern invasion of Sweden seemed to progress more steadily than our conquest of India. Using only naval power, once again we seized control of Lund. They continued their assault of Swedish coastal cities by attacking Linköping. Another meeting of the World Congress came around, and we knew that Canada was a threat at the diplomatic game. Still, they managed to sway the Congress and gain 2 more diplomatic points. Using mostly naval power and a bit of faith to purchase a cavalry unit, we were able to capture Linköping, which also gave us control of the natural wonder Ik-Kiel. The war with India had raged on for centuries, and in 1814, Chennai fell to the Norwegians. A few turns later, Sergei Korolev and Douglas MacArthur offered their talents to Norway. One would help us ensure that a space race victory was not so easily handed over to our adversaries. The other would help in our conquest of our enemies. After subduing Chennai, I was able to finally capture Madurai, a key city in the heart of India. Seizing control of these 2 cities broke the back of the enemy and brought the promise that I would finally be able to hold Bangalore and Hyderabad. Knowing his end was near, Chandragupta offered me the great work, War and Peace. I accepted the war part, not the peace. Calcutta fell to us again soon after. All that remained was to strike at Patna, the capital. Concerned about one of my rivals stealing a religious victory, I checked the world rankings. Though Canada were in the lead, they appeared to be no threat in the religion department. Oh, if only I had looked down a smidge. That very turn, Canada snuck away with a diplomatic victory. I was not too pleased. The atomic era is an early time to win the game. With the fall of India, I felt that the game was swinging toward our plans for domination. Sweden were being picked apart and the invasion of Japan was waiting for its moment. Canada had mostly been left in isolation, but the Western army that had conquered India was only a few turns from launching its assault. What did I learn? 1. Wars need to be swift, decisive, and complete. That is a rule. Number 2, military resources in the early game are hugely important for a domination victory. A lack of iron slowed my conquest of the Scots, and a lack of oil slowed my conquest of India. Bangalore and Hyderabad flipped loyalty a half dozen times each. Same problem with Calcutta. The only city I really took and held was Trivandrum. I may have been better off raising these cities to allow my main army to control the Indian mainland rather than trying to hold these cities. And finally, number 4, the most obvious ways to win the game are domination and science. Culture is the most difficult, religion is the obviously sneaky way, but diplomacy is the less obvious and still sneaky way. There may never have been a chance to actually defeat Canada. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to keep playing and making your own civilization stories, your own amazing paths through history, and I'll see you next time.